Hello and welcome to ELT Cast, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.com. In today's episode 125, we're going to talk about replicating research in English language teaching training. If you have any thoughts, insights, or would like to share any of your experiences, feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle, BNLEEZ. Today's topic is related to those taking academic writing. Specifically, we're in week 4, where we're looking at different studies that are going to later support our literature review. I want to talk today about replicating a study, which might be something that you take into consideration next semester when you're doing your own research. This same study that you might consider as replicating or repeating next semester, of course, might also be used to support your literature review that you're developing this semester. So today I want to talk about replicating a study and provide some examples and some clarification perhaps on what to consider whenever you are considering a study to replicate, again for the purposes of academic writing, where we're going to be limited to the types of studies that we're going to be able to do ourselves next semester. So replicating research is a crucial part of any kind of scientific process. It helps validate findings, ensures reliability, and it can even uncover new insights. For English language teacher trainers, replicating studies can provide a valuable evidence to support teaching practices, and it can also improve training programs. But how exactly can you go about replicating a study? And what parts of that study can be adapted to fit your own specific research goals? Let's break it down. So, understanding replication, first let's talk about what it means to replicate a study. Replication involves repeating a study's methodology or method to see if the original results can be reproduced. This can be done in 2 basic ways. You can think of it, number 1, in terms of direct replication, that is following pretty much exactly the same process of conducting the study, or what's called conceptual replication. Direct replication involves following the original study's procedure as closely as possible. The goal is to see if you can achieve the same results using the same methods. Conceptual replication involves testing the same hypothesis or research questions, but with different methods or in a different context. This helps to see if the findings are robust across various conditions. Now, think of replicating a study as falling somewhere between these 2, let's say, extremes. There's a lot of nuance in how you can go about replicating a study. There's a lot of variation. But let's look at some of the key aspects when considering either replicating a study or modifying a study. So when replicating a study, there are several key aspects you can either replicate exactly or modify it to suit your own research objectives. Let's discuss 3 main aspects. The first being participants. When you're thinking about replicating the participants, you're using very similar demographic types of information based on the original study. For example, if the original study focused on novice English teachers in urban schools, try to replicate this participant group. Any kind of modifications would involve adjusting the participant group to fit your own context. If you're interested in rural schools or more experienced teachers, you can modify this aspect while keeping other variables constant. The second main aspect to consider when you're replicating or modifying your study is related to materials and instruments. When you're thinking about replication or replicating materials and instruments, use pretty much the same teaching materials, assessment tools, and questionnaires as the original study. This ensures consistency with what you're measuring. If you're going to modify materials and instruments, you would adapt these materials to better fit your own context. For instance, if the original study used a specific textbook, you might use a different one that's more relevant to your participants, but still measures the same constructs. The third aspect that you could replicate is related to procedures. When you replicate a procedure, you follow the same procedures for data collection and analysis. This includes the timing, setting, and methods. Timing is very important because, as you know, next semester, we're only going to have roughly 3 to 4 weeks to collect data. So when you're looking for studies to replicate, timing and the period for collecting the data is going to be essential so that you can replicate something very similar. When you modify procedures, you're going to be adjusting procedures to accommodate practical constraints. If the original study required multiple classroom observations, but you have limited access, you might use video recordings instead. So let's look at 2 examples of replication in action. So the first, let's consider teacher feedback methods. The original study, let's assume that it investigated the impact of immediate versus delayed feedback on teacher performance. A replication might use the same feedback methods and timing with similar group of teachers. Some kind of modification might include, if the context involves online teaching, you might modify the feedback delivery method to fit an online platform. Another example might include classroom management techniques. The original study, let's say they examined the impact of specific classroom management techniques on student engagement. The replication might apply the same techniques in a similar classroom setting. Some kind of modification might include that if the study involves a different age group or educational level, you might adjust the techniques to be age appropriate while maintaining the core principles. Now, before we conclude, I want to give one specific example of an article that I came across and show an example of perhaps how you can modify or think a little bit differently, even though maybe the study would help to consider for repeating or replicating. I want to give an example of how you might think about modifying it when it comes to the research questions. Now, the article that I'm looking at is called Pronunciation Instruction and Students Practice to Develop Their Confidence in EFL Oral Skills. This is a study by Tasalo and Basurto. And if you're looking at this article, you should be able to find it online. I'm going to jump down to the method section, or just before the method section, where it lists 2 research questions, and then it has a paragraph describing the method. So the research questions for this study include 2 yes or no questions. The first being, do students receive pronunciation instruction in the classroom? The second question, do students who are trained in pronunciation possess confidence when producing the EFL? Now, this is a qualitative study. They are exploring patterns, feelings, and the meaning of a given situation. The study is to explore the context around these 2 questions related to pronunciation. So the focus can still be on this particular area of, let's say, investigating pronunciation or teaching or instructing pronunciation with English language learners. But another way to look at the research questions is move from a yes or no question to, let's say, a how or a why question. So maybe some kind of question about how an English language teacher instructs or helps, what kind of strategies are used to help students with pronunciation in class. And then a second question around confidence. How confident are English language students when they're practicing pronunciation in the classroom? Again, the focus is pretty much the same, but we're moving from a yes or no question that tends to be more quantitative in nature to a more open question that lends itself more to a qualitative research approach. Again, the focus is primarily on the same areas. There might even be a couple of other aspects or a couple of other research questions that are included in this study if the writer, the researcher, is planning on 3 or 4 main sections in the literature review that relate again to this overall topic of pronunciation instruction in the English language learning classroom. So to conclude, replicating research is a powerful way to contribute to the field of English language teacher training. By carefully considering which aspects of a study to replicate or modify, you can ensure your research is both rigorous and relevant to your context. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Replicating Research in English Language Teacher Training. This is ELT Cast, an educational podcast making English language teaching and learning more transparent. My name's Benjamin Stewart, and until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.